Direct from Montreal, Canada, this is Rock Talk with Mitch LaFon. Rock Talk with Mitch LaFon.
Welcome to this episode of Rock Talk with Mitch LaFon on this Mitch Marathon Month. Well, okay, not Marathon Month. It is the holiday marathon. Knowing that a lot of people stay home for the holiday breaks, I will be putting up an episode almost every day, or certainly as much as possible. On the last episode with Mark Starace of Crocus, had a little rant about how some people don't see bands, or we don't appreciate bands in North America from the European countries and stuff. And I wanted to mention, because I forgot to sort of put it in there, but Canadian bands also seem to have this same fate where there's a lot of bands here that do great and they've been around for 30, 40 years, and yet overseas or in the States, people don't really know about them. Case in point, last night I saw Glass Tiger just outside of Montreal in a room that holds 712 people at capacity, and it was sold out. I'm assuming that if Glass Tiger went over to London or to Tokyo or to, well, actually Tokyo, probably everybody supports bands. Tokyo loves supporting bands, but if I send them over to Texas, probably wouldn't be a sold out show. And so we've got a lot of bands here: Honeymoon Suite, Killer Dwarves, Helix, Lee Aaron, and so many more that just, and even Gowan as a solo artist, and Bryan Adams in the beginning, and so Celine Dion way back in the beginning. They had these 5, 10, 15-year careers here before they ever exploded anywhere on the scene. There's a French lady, a French artist, a French singer, I should say, here in Quebec named Marie May. And she just played the Bell Center for 2 sold-out shows, so 2 times 18,000. And as you're listening to this, you're going, Mary who? Right? And yet over here, it's a great hysteria, great love. By the way, speaking of hysteria, I've got an interview with Joe Elliott coming up very shortly. But before that, here is my interview with David Glen Eisley. David Glen has sang with the best over the years. He's got the SpongeBob song, which everybody loves. And on this conversation, it is live co-hosted by guitarist Bob Kulick. Now, Bob starts the interview, and you hear him chime in and chit-chat and talk, and then he sits back and he just lets me and David do what we want to do. And, of course, if any of you are Kiss fans and you're sitting here for some kind of great controversy that Bob is going to say something and, no, in fact, this was a David Glen Eisley interview. Bob was kind enough or courteous enough to set it up, and so he is here. You do hear him chime in, but if you're expecting any kind of controversy in regards to his brother or the band, Kiss, or anyway, without further ado, here is the one, the only, David Glen Eisley. For his return appearance, it is the one, the only, Bob Kulick, joined by David Glen Eisley. Together, combined, they have given us Sweet Victory, the SpongeBob SquarePants song. Bonjour, monsieur. Hello, how are you?
Good morning, Mitch.
Yes, so let's...
Good morning, Mitch. How are you?
Yes, I'm good. So let us identify the voices for the fans listening. So I'll go to you, Dave. Dave, we have never actually done an interview. We've spoken before, but Dave, just say hello to everybody so that they can sort of get the voice as we go out on this podcast platform.
Well, I'll say this is David Glen Eisley. No, hey, everybody, this is David Glen Eisley, and I'm speaking to Mitch LaFon with my buddy, Bob Kulick.
Yes, and Bob, you and I have spoken before. The fans have been listening to it. There was great interest in the Kiss world for our last interview, but this time we're going to focus on Bob Kulick, we're going to focus on David Glen, we're going to focus on the new album, we're going to focus on SpongeBob, Graham Bonnet. So let us talk about Sweet Victory. What's the update on this, Bob? You now own the song, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, to avoid confusion, I think a business conversation about what happened is not necessary. What's most important about this is that the song lives again, standing on its own 2 feet, except this time it's not a sponge singing it. It's my great friend and super talented artist, David Glen Eisley, who I wrote this song with. And that to me is very important, that people finally accept that it's not the Sponge singing, it's Dave.
I think that I remember it correctly. I did sing this, if I do remember correctly.
You know, Mitch, it's an incredible story how a man who was a marine biologist, Stephen Hillenburg, turned himself into an empire by coming up with a simple idea of SpongeBob SquarePants and all those characters to affect not only children and kids, but generations of people. Hearing our song back in the day, he was inspired to write that episode around the song. Do you have any idea what an honor that is for Dave and I? That this genius picked our song and made this episode that lives 25 years later? The song itself is a miracle because we had no idea what we were doing when we did it.
No, when Bob and I, to reiterate with some of that, and so from the very beginning, Bob and I met on a ball field, and we started writing tunes together. He approached me about which was the Murderer's Row, became the Murderer's Row thing, but in doing so, we started writing, like guys do. They either do or they don't. They either have an affinity for each other or they don't, and we did. And that song, or at least a sketch of that song, was one of several songs. And we looked at each other and we said, this is before anybody approached us or anything like that. We said, why don't we write something that, because we both dig sports, we both play sports, and why don't we write something in the competitive vein, kind of musically sort of leaning towards a We Are Champions type thing. Now, this is all preconceived. We had already been speaking about doing that and sketching something out. So when we got approached, or actually Bob got approached by a friend who was a mutual friend of Neil Portnow, who now as Music Cares and all that stuff. So this is way back when Neil was cutting his teeth and all this kind of stuff. Somebody had asked Bob and I if we had anything in the vein of it. Well, we went, we said, we thought, well, yeah, we might, and then we went back to that sketch, which was already, on the stove, so to speak, and that became Sweet Victory. And then when he heard it, we gave him a little cassette demo of it and played it for him, and and then somehow, some way, a couple years later, without us even knowing it, and this is literally the truth, without us knowing this, a couple years later, it showed up on the cartoon, and it was unannounced to us. We had no idea. My daughter ran into the room when she was a little kid. She ran in and she went, Dad, the Sponge is singing, and I swear it's you. And it was like, what? And then, and the rest is sort of history, so, but that's where it actually came from. It was amidst a half a dozen other song sketches.
And interestingly enough, if I could interject,
of course,
that we had no idea that something like this was even possible, let alone that it happened. And even without knowing that he wrote the episode around it at first, the detail of the Sponge, of SpongeBob actually singing that with his head down and then raising his head to sing, it was chilling to me because it was so right on.
Yeah.
That it affected everybody by showing the stadium and those two guys in Kiss makeup, crying and the response.
Yeah, and at that time, Bob and I both, were out playing arenas and doing stuff like that. And then to see, I had to start, for years, I had to keep looking in the mirror and seeing if I was yellow or if I was flesh color. I didn't know who I was anymore. I lost all identity. It was crazy. Years later, this ridiculously huge petition was started prior to in 2018 for the 19 Super Bowl, and it just exploded. And it was like the song. But at that point, Bob and I had already really decided we wanted to recut. We've basically recut the whole damn tune, and that's what people are hearing now, the little short little condensed version. This is all brand new, but very true to, what we originally had done. We just recut it with better mics.
Yeah, and then added the other elements that we've adding orchestration through Doug Katsaris,
right?
My good friend from Balance. The guy conducted the Boston Pops.
Yeah.
Let me ask
you what the talent level is.
Now, this new version that came out to commemorate Stephen Hillenburg, who passed away at the end of November 2018. So this new version came out. Now, did you change anything? I mean, I know you've reimagined the song, but Eric Singer of Kiss was on the original one drumming. Is he still on there drumming, or have you substituted all the instrumentation?
No, we substituted everything. We brought in a couple other than Bob and I. I played some keys on it. Bob played bass on it. Doug played some additional keyboards on it, obviously, because he's a ridiculously brilliant orchestrator. We had a couple studio cats come in, one being a drummer, and we rebooted the whole thing. I re-sang it. It's just it's a whole new deal, but it's totally in keeping with what we did originally. As far as the song content and the way we did it. I mean, I sang basically as many. I followed the map. Bob basically followed his map that we had already laid out, and we just did it so sonically the whole thing would be 100%, better and more,
more modern
access it
as well.
Yeah, more modern, and we could access it via multi-tracks and be able to do whatever we wanted to do with it. We could turn it upside down, inside out, sideways, backwards, and forwards, because we've got that technology now, which we didn't have in the very beginning.
Yeah, this is the amazing thing that we were talking about in our other interview, Mitch, the multi-tracks. Just for your audience, bands record each instrument will be on a separate track, and hence the term multi-tracks. Back in the day, it was an analog tape. We all know the image of the big reels that were put on. We've all seen the Beatles footage and all of that. But now, it's not that. It's Pro Tools and all of that stuff. And so the ability to move things around and tune stuff, I'm proud to say that recording lived unedited and untuned, because a singer of Dave's caliber doesn't need fixing like everybody today. He doesn't need fixing the way it used to be. What you sing is what you hear, not somebody pouring over it, fixing every note.
Exactly.
Now I could dress a little better.
You could dress better. Now, I do want to ask David a little bit about his new album, of course, Tattered, Torn And Worn. But before I get to that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you were, of course, in Giuffria, and there was two albums that came out, and the albums had Chuck Wright, and you had Ken Mary, who had played with Alice Cooper, and Andy Johns, and it was just some great stuff. But the third album, to this day, remains unreleased, correct? Giuffria III?
Well, the Giuffria III, I'll do it as short as I can. Giuffria III actually is, in actuality, is on Frontiers, I released a record called The Lost Tapes. Now, in that compilation would probably have made up, and those were all demos, may I say, those ended up, about half a dozen of those ended up on the first House of Lords record. Okay, those are things that Greg and I wrote. They ended up on the House of Lords record. There's some outtakes of Dirty White Boy on that record, but again, there was the quantity of stuff that Greg and I wrote that are on that Lost Tapes album or CD were surpassed the amount of songs we needed for the Giuffria III record. So in actuality, the Giuffria III record kind of lies in that Lost Tapes album of demos. They were done in full blow studios, but they were done on over a course of like 12 songs in a day. When Bob, you and I remember, we used to call them burn sessions, where you just go in there and you would just blast through these things literally like live, and then at 3:00 in the morning you'd start mixing them, and hopefully have them mixed by 9 over at Sound City or where have you, because you're going to get thrown out on your ear because somebody was getting you in there on some deal, But that's really where the third Giuffria record lies, is in my Lost Tapes album. And I only say my because I'm the one who just compiled it all together, had all the wherewithal to put it together, and it was put out. Frontiers put it out. And it's still available. I mean, you can still find it. And if you can't, I got a box or whatever.
You got right. Well, I'll have to get one for you. But let me ask you though, because you go out and you open for Foreigner on the Agent Provocateur tour back in '85, I guess that was
85,
right?
85, and then
everything.
Perfect Strangers tour for Deep Purple.
That's right. So, and I was going to get to that. So you've got these prime opening slots for Purple and for Foreigner. You've got the videos are coming out. Where did it sort of take a left turn where the record company and the band and everybody just went, well, the hell with it, band over? What was the sort of the mistake?
The mistake was, I remember the town. We were in Birmingham, Alabama. We were opening for Foreigner. The Deep Purple tour was absolutely a nightmare, only because of a guitar player. I won't mention any names. It was just a very uncomfortable situation because based on Call to the Heart, they were expecting to get in kind of like a semi-Journey / Eagles type of a band, and it was hardly what we were. So when we opened up in Texas, it was like a unnamed person kind of flipped his cork and said, "This is not what we expected." Because the place, we tore the place apart. They loved it, So anyway, what happened was after we did Purple, we jumped to the Foreigner tour, and we were in Birmingham, and there was a whole to-do. All of a sudden, we were never told, and there was a whole video, huge company. Back in those days, everything was big. And Foreigner or somebody, they were shooting our show. They had the cranes going and the whole thing, blah, blah, blah. And we later find out we're in the bar of the hotel, and everybody was a little bit out of their minds back in those days. And the director of that video, he got into it with Greg and with a couple of people. We were questioning him, like, what was all this? Why were you shooting us? And there was a whole argument ensued. And something got back to the head of MCA at the time, which was not particularly a very good rock and roll record company to begin with. And we fell victim to that. But anyway, this argument ensued, and that argument got back to Mr. Azoff at the same time that our second single was being released. And that argument provoked Mr. Azoff to basically say, "Well, I'm not going to help this single." So he basically kind of unplugged the network, so to speak, at a very unopportune time for us. So it's really kind of a mixed bag there because everybody was, like I said, a little bit out of their minds. They didn't really know what they were saying to each other, and bad news and unfiltered information that's not even actually accurate gets back to different power sources, and before you know it, there's animosity going on, this, that, and the other, and boom, the next thing we know, we're headlining in Japan, and half the band is like saying, "Oh God, we're going to jump ship." Chuck was going back to Quiet Riot, and Goldie was going to go hook up with Ronnie. And that was like while we were gigging in Japan. The band was already going to have to reboot itself for the second record, which we did, So that was just an unfortunate time, but it was, and I'll say it out loud. I have no problem saying it at all. It was a horrible record company at that time for rock and roll. So.
And by the way, you're not the first.
It wasn't meant to be.
You're not the first one who's told me that. MCA has been its reputation over the years, and no matter that makes no difference who you talk to. It was just they had no idea what to do with rock. They sort of got in on the train at the end, going, "Oh wow, we now have to develop rock bands because the Sunset Strips," and it didn't work. But I will ask you this, since you mentioned that there was this videotaping. What's the answer? Why were they taping it?
They were taping our audience, because what we were doing live and what we were doing out there is, after about Foreigner would come on, and after 2 or 3 songs, they were incredible. It was like the hit after hit tour, we used to call it. And we'd watch them for a few nights, and then pretty soon it just became very, very low-key and boring, because they didn't really do much on stage. They just played these songs. And after we were done, the audience would get all but, sedate until they got the jukebox era and they were shutting the set down and they were finishing, So they were basically using the reactions of our audience for their video. And there was because of that, there was this whole big argument in this bar back in Birmingham. And it became very ugly. And it got back to MCA. They were like, "How dare you, record our audience, for them, And I don't even know how accurate that was, but there was a certain amount of accuracy to it, because we witnessed it. We'd see it every night, place to go nuts, and then
I get it, but respectfully, crowd swell, as they call it in the industry, whether it's a live album, whatever albums you want to talk about, people use NFL crowd swell, and they use this and that. It's sort of an industry standard to sort of cheat. But I will connect the dots here. You were opening for Foreigner. You have a new album out called Tattered, Torn, and Worn. It features drummer Ron Wixow, who, of course, played for Foreigner for a couple of years in the 90s, 94, 95, 96-ish, something like that. Even plays on some unreleased... and he plays on some... Richie Sambora.
Richie Sambora's played a lot of people.
A lot of people, yeah. And they recorded some demos with Foreigner in 96 that have never seen the light of day because... Lou Gramm had his brain incident, or his head injury. I'm trying to say that respectfully, but he had a medical issue, and the demos and that session remain unreleased. I've heard them though; they're great stuff. But Bob, we're not forgetting you, Bob. We're going to get back to you, but just quickly.
No, this is all very interesting stuff.
Good.
It has some fascinating experiences, and I think the audience is going to love hearing about this.
Yeah, I don't want to think that we've forgotten you, Bob. We're still there.
But, I'm listening intently.
Nobody forgets Bob.
Nobody forgets. But I do want to quickly talk about Tattered, Torn, and Worn, because here you are. You are making new music.
It's a great record.
It's a great record.
Voice, geez.
Well, thank you, guys.
Well, I've gone to...
It has its moments. It has a few moments.
Yeah, well, you know what? Listen, I've gone to, not YouTube, to Spotify.
Hey, excuse me. Anything you sing has more than its moments, dude.
Right. So just talk to me about this new album and using Ron on drums, who, of course, was in Foreigner. I like to say that. And Richie Sambora. And just let the fans know about the new album. And other than Spotify, where can they get it? I believe it's at CD Baby, right? Where they can pick it up?
Yeah, you can get it at CD Baby. You can get it at CD Baby. You allegedly should be able to get it at Amazon, but they always say that they're sold out, which they may or may not be. I don't know, because I keep getting reorders from CD Baby, so I don't know who's fulfilling, Amazon. But nevertheless, that record came right on the heels of a very unfortunate situation. When I got pulled back into the whole thing, I was semi-retired. Because I basically my daughter started acting back in 2008, and she was underage, and I basically had to I was on the onset. I was the onset fella, that would take, make sure she was okay and all this kind of stuff. So I basically took a hiatus for about 5 years until she was, 18. And actually, God bless him, we all have our problems. But Goldie, Craig, he kind of like
He nudged
wrenched
you.
me out of the house.
Yeah, he did.
He called me up and he basically did everything but put a noose around my neck and dragged me out of the house and said, "You're going to start playing again and singing because people want to hear it." So we cut a deal with Frontiers, and it was the
Eisley Goldie Blood, Guts, and Games album.
Yeah, the Eisley Goldie.
See?
Yeah, and
I know your career better than you.
Thank you. And it turned into a debacle. It was a very unfortunate. He was going through health issues, personal issues, this, that, and the other. So we never really got into the studio together, and it was really a hodgepodge where I was basically left, trying to just complete songs because there were no songs written. So it was like it really kind of wrecked our relationship because he just never showed up. He never came to the party, and it ended up in Italy in their lap to try to piece together this whole piecemeal thing, and it was a nightmare. But in that experience, I met Paul Calder. Now, Paul was basically my partner, and he's kind of like my partner here in L.A. He's an unknown hero for me, anyhow. He's like an insane guitar player, but he's just the sweetest meat and potatoes guy, and he's a big fan. But he's an incredible musician. He's got his own band that play prog rock that's insane. And I cut him loose on my thing, on the Tattered Torn And Worn thing, and just said, "Well, you play a shitload better than I do, so why don't you show me what you can do?" And then he started playing a couple things, and I said, do another one. And he's an absolute techno whiz. So he's got, full blow things. So it started off, the whole record started in my Pro Tools studio here in the house. And then I would just transfer it over to his place. He'd do a lot of the stuff there. Then we bring it back here, and then we mixed it. And that record, I'll end with this. That record is more of a purging for me because above and beyond the music.
That's a great word, purging.
By the way,
there you go.
Could you say the album is a great word? Could you say the album is a sweet victory for you?
It was actually a purging for me. Honestly, if you just pull the book out, don't even put the music on, and read the lyrics, you go, this guy's been gone through hell the last 2 years. He's like tattered, torn, and worn. And that is literally, it was literally a quote while Paul and I were leaning on the desk doing the other thing with Goldie. And I just looked at him. I looked down and I just said, "I am tattered, torn, and fucking worn. I'm burnt." And he looked at me, he just glanced up and he says, "That sounds pretty cool." So I just jotted it down. And that became the title of my record, which I jumped right back got back on the roller coaster immediately. And he said, you got to, right after this nightmare, you got to jump right back in and do your own thing. And that's what happened. I wrote 25 songs in a period of, 4 months. And then, as you see, I squeezed 14 tunes on there, which I probably shouldn't have done, but I did because I had to get it out of my system. And that's what that record was all about.
No, 14 great songs. People definitely need to check it out. I have listened to it on Spotify, and I think it's the voice is there, man. It's amazing. Before we wrap up, let me just ask Bob this real quick, because you have been working with Graham Bonnet. You, of course, had done stuff with Blackthorn and Graham back in the day. What is this new project with Graham? Is it a project? Is it a song? Is it 2 songs? Is it 10 songs? Bob, what are you up to?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I've been blessed to be able to work with some of the greatest singers in the world, of which Dave is at the top of the list, and Graham Bonnet, top 5. This is an amazing singer, 70 years old. He came to Las Vegas with his band last year, and I got up and played a couple of songs with him. Standing next to him, he's so loud. It was incredible. I've worked with Meat Loaf and people like that who were loud on stage, but Graham is like, it's just incredible for a guy weighing 160 pounds to project that much. Like Dave Eisley, who, when he sings, you feel it. So Graham asked me if I would contribute 2 songs to his new record. So Steve Vai is contributing some songs. A whole bunch of good people are going to be involved. And
that's cool.
Graham's had
you didn't tell me this,
physical
Bobby.
difficulties. Yeah. He's had some physical issues later, and yet he just finished a tour where, despite being in severe pain, went out and did his job. A real trooper, somebody who lives for the music. So we're going to be recording a couple of songs actually next week here in Vegas for his new record. I'm really excited about it. Obviously, Graham's got his own thing. I'm just guesting. Whereas Dave and I, we have some big plans for the future.
Yeah, we got some serious stuff up our sleeves, which we're proud of, we're happy about. And, it's like, it was a big circle, but it was a full circle. And here we are, from the softball field in 1984 to 2019 going into 20. And we're sitting on a total, it's like Apocalypse Now redux, or whatever that word means. And here we are, and it's grown into like a little 3-headed monster now. Bob, me, and the song. And, and here we go. So I think 20 is going to be a real eye-opener for us and for the fans of the song that were so damn disappointed, at the Super Bowl outcome, which was a nightmare. I mean, it was really a bummer for a lot of people, and that's, it's what it was, but it disappointed and let a lot of people down. So, there was nothing of our doing, but, so we've just, we learned a lot from that. We never realized what the song meant to so many people and how it touched them and how they grew up with it. And, it's like, I'm not trying to pin orchids on each other, but, in itself, it is an iconic tune. And it's going to be a classic when we're gone. It's still going to be being played, so not to put ourselves in any parallel with Freddie and Brian, but it's without even meaning to do it. It's like our version of, We Are the Champions or We Will Rock You, or for any kind of an event. It's an event sort of song, and it's an uplifting song that it came straight from the heart, and it came straight out of total honesty and without meaning to do anything. We were just 2 songwriters that just got together and wrote half a dozen tunes, one of which happened to be what turned into that, Sweet Victory.
And it's a great song.
We knew at the time that the song was special.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Due to the circumstance, we were not in a band together. How do we use this? We figured out how to use it. Because Stephen Hillenburg figured out how to use it. That's why it was important to do that tribute to him on the anniversary of his passing. Not to sell it, but to give it away, because Dave's voice and those lyrics are everything.
Yep,
that tells the story.
It was a very touching tribute, and I will finish on this, and I'll send it to Dave just real quick. I've always been curious to find out. You've had a successful music career. Your wife and daughter have had successful movie careers, but you had wanted to be a professional baseball player. Is that the one thing that you look back and you just went, oh, if I could have just been a Yankee for one afternoon, it would have made everything,
Well, to be totally honest with you, Mitch, I sort of had one foot in there because I played Double-A with the San Francisco Giants.
That's right.
I was scouted by the Giants, and I played about 18 months. I was a pitcher, and I played strictly in the minors. I never got up to the big show or even close to it. But that's only because after 18 months of putting up with this pitching coach, I wanted to kill the guy, and I almost did. So I got let go. I got let go. I got I got 86 out of the club. But no, I played. I was actually on my way. I mean, I came up with, I'll age myself because everybody knows anyway. I came up in the same rookie leagues and scouting departments as Gary Maddox Sr., Gary Matthews Sr. We all played on the same rookie team, which was like up and down the coast of California and this, that, and the other. And so I got a taste of it. So when I look back on it, I remember being in there, and during that 18 months, I was pretty miserable. It was like, this isn't what it's all about. This is just totally a nightmare, because everybody was like vying for their own, especially pitchers. They were vying for their own, self-worth and trying to get there. So it was like it wasn't a teammate kind of a thing. It was everybody, hedging for
every man for himself.
Every man for himself. Thank you, Bob. So it was like pitchers, man. They were like, they'd have so many on the roster, and you'd be just trying to get a couple innings in where you'd get to throw once a week, and the other guy hated you, and he'd been sitting in those minors for 5 years, and I was a young kid that had a high leg kick like Marichal, and so it was like they just hated me the minute I showed up at training camp. I could throw the ball, like a BB, but but
see, the funny thing when I met Dave at the ballpark was I had no idea he was a ringer. So Pat Torby, may he rest in peace, Chuck Wright, Robin Zander, John Purdell, Nuno Betancourt, a whole bunch of Dave Amato, Ricky Phillips.
Yeah,
these were the
Sunday
people on
bums,
the team with a bunch of jocks. So I'm playing with these guys, and I know they're all musicians. I know Dave's a singer. I hit a ball into center field, and I'm like, here's a home run for me. Dave takes the shortest route there possible, dives totally outstretched, and I look out there as I'm reaching second base, and the ball goes right in his glove. And I just stood there and took my hat off, and I was just like, how is that possible? And then I found out that he plays real baseball. So I was like, oh, my God, I actually know somebody who's got that kind of talent.
That's how we met.
He was in the Giants organization. That hit. So there you go. On that, we will. That was a sweet victory for Dave, and of course, the song is a sweet victory for both of you. And this interview is a sweet victory for me. It's a sweet victory all around. A lot of victories everywhere. As we say, you're welcome. As we say in Montreal, merci beaucoup. Thank you so much. And boy, both of you, when the new albums in the 2020 and whatever you're doing comes out, let's do this again. It's been a lot of fun.
Absolutely, my friend.
You're always the best, dude. Come on. You give really great interviews, and you're passionate about the music, and that's the most important thing to me and Dave.
Yep.
It's all about the music. Thank you.
Well, it's about the passion, because it's not about the pay. Let me tell you.
Join the club. Join the club, Mitch.
I know. Anyway, on that, I am going to go unstretch my back because it has completely locked on me. And here we go. Merci, monsieur.
CBD,
thank you, man.
CBD.
Absolutely. And everything, and Aleve. It's my time to go get some Aleve. But thank you, folks. There you go. Merci.
Thank you, Mitch.
Here's Paul Stanley to tell you why he doesn't want to shake your hand.
Some people might have a little rock and roll pneumonia.
Ugh, not even cold gin will kill those germs. This is Rock Talk with Mitch LaFon.